Good morning, Stampers. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm Pat Fairless from Fairless Stamp and Flair, and we're here today with Learning with Friends. Learning with Friends is a video series that I've been doing for, I don't know, probably a couple year and a half at least, I'm going to say, where each week I bring you a different technique, or maybe it's a fun fold or just some tips or tricks. To try to show you something maybe new or remind you of something that you've done before to help with your card making and paper crafting. Today, the technique I'm going to share is called salted background. And I'm going to be honest, this is the first time for this video that I tried it. Now, I did practice last week, right? And I learned some things from my practicing. But it's an old technique. When I first became a demonstrator back in 2007, I would search, and I was doing classes in my house, I would search the internet for as much as the internet was back then for ideas, and I always have loved techniques. And Split Coast Stampers was one of the sites that was around way back then, and they had techniques on there. And you could watch and learn and written tutorials on how to do them. And this salted background technique was one of those tutorials that I found way back in 2007. And I know that because back then I used to print them out and put them in a 3-ring binder. And recently I've started to pull out that background or that binder to look for new ideas because I'm running out of ideas. And I came across this salted background one, and I'm like, you never tried it, Pat. Let's give it a try. It didn't necessarily look all that intriguing, but I got to tell you, it was fun. So there are some old things around that might be new to you. It's certainly not a new idea, but I had not done it before. So we're gonna do it today, and let's flip the camera over and go ahead and get started. So you don't need a lot of supplies. It is called salted background, so obviously one of the things you need is salt. And it did indicate in the technique that coarse salt works better, and it specifically listed kosher salt. I didn't have kosher salt, but I went and bought some because I'm like, well, this is the first time I'm going to do it. I better get it right. We'll just use what it says. I did not try regular table salt, but I think any coarse salt would be fine now that I've done it and figured out kind of how it works. It also indicated you should to use glossy cardstock. So we're going to start with glossy cardstock, but I'm going to tell you, because we don't sell this anymore, I often will use photo paper, and I experimented. I took some time this week and I experimented with glossy cardstock. I used some photo paper. In fact, that's what I did first. I just took some scraps, and I'll show you the card I made with that. And then after I did the glossy, I'm like, well, I'm going to try it with just regular cardstock. And I also did use our old shimmery white, because shimmery white manages water a little bit better, or it handles water. And you do want a cardstock that's going to be able to deal with getting wet, that it's not going to disintegrate in front of your eyes because it got too much water on, because you do use a fair amount of water. So, but I'm going to show you the glossy one first. I have 4 cards actually, because I'm going to show you one with all 4 of those types of paper, and you can see the difference, how they look. Not as much difference as you might think, but I got some tips and tricks for each one. So the first thing you do is you take a water spritzer. Once you got whatever cardstock you want to use, you're going to use a water spritzer and spritz it and lay on a light coat of water. You're going to get your salt handy, and like I said, I just grabbed some kosher salt. I am sure any coarse salt would work fine. So if you have some kind of a, maybe sea salt, is that coarser? I don't know. I'm not a big salt person. I don't use a lot of salt. And then we need a water painter. So I'm going to use the medium-sized tip one. I'm going to start with that. So we'll get that handy. And then we need some colors of ink, and you can pick any colors you like. I am going to start with pecan pie, pumpkin pie. I guess I'm into pie this week. And pretty peacock. Did you notice how all the Stampin' Up! Colors, both words of them always start with the same letter? Well, in this case, these three, they all start with P. Pecan pie, pumpkin pie, and pretty peacock. I don't know, they must like something about peas. So I like to usually put a drop of re-inker in my lid. That works best for me. You could also use an acrylic block and just pick up some ink from your pad if you don't have the refills. That works fine as well. You just need something where you can pick up easily some ink. Oh, that was not good. It'll be fine. We're going to wipe it off. This is just practice to teach you how to do it. I probably should have done this before I started. But I will tell you, I always do also start with a piece of cardstock that is a little larger than what I ultimately tend to end up with. So if you do, the edges sometimes get a little funky when you're using water. Water is messy, right? And if you make it bigger, you can trim it down, and then you can use those pieces you trim to either decorate maybe a strip on the inside or a strip on your envelope or something. So we're going to move this back just a bit so that I don't spritz into my ink pads. And we're just going to put a light bit of water on here. This is probably something you will want to practice and play around with. You don't have to worry too much about getting too much water on glossy cardstock because it resists it very well. The only thing is, the wetter it is, the more water, when you put your ink on it, it's really going to spread. So, and I like to have a little glass of water handy just to kind of keep my water painter rinsed between colors. But let's go ahead and I'm going to start with pretty peacock. And I put a drop in here just to thin it down just a bit. And you can see when I go ahead and touch this, see how it's running? Because there's a fair amount of water on there. And that's kind of what we want it to do. We want it to spread. It's not a huge big deal if it doesn't. Just add a little bit more water. Squeeze your water painter as you're applying the ink, and so you get water down into the tip. And let's put a little bit just down here in this corner. And again, I'm just scribbling and putting water down, or ink down. So another good hint is lay it on a piece of paper towel. Since we are messing with water, it'll just help absorb the excess water and ink. Plus, you kind of want it to be able to scribble. In between colors, I would recommend squeezing your water painter. You can see the water kind of bubbles out a little bit, and just rub it on your paper towel until you get rid of most of that color. You don't really want to muddy up your colors, right? So let's go ahead and add some pumpkin pie up here. And I am squeezing my water painter a little bit. If you want it oranger, don't. And pick up where your ink is right into your drop a little bit more. Every one of these is going to turn out different. Now, the first time I did this with these three colors, I really it ran quite a bit, and I did not end up with very much pumpkin pie. It's mostly the pecan pie and the pretty peacock, which colors look beautiful together. But I wanted more pumpkin pie. So today I'm trying to get a little bit more pumpkin pie on here. And I would say I probably spritzed plenty of water. I probably could have done a little bit less, but it's okay. it'll be fine. So that's pretty clean. So let's grab a little bit of this pecan pie, and we'll just touch the corner up here, and we'll kind of fill in down in here. And you can see it's running, but that's okay. That's exactly what we want it to do. And it's going to run more on the glossy cardstock than it will if you have, say, thick basic white. I use thick basic white, and that's the other one I'm going to demo for you today. So let's call that good. And I'm going to get this cleaned out here one more time. You want to get that, you just don't want to bring the color that might be in your brush into the next color that you use. But these are the three colors I'm going to use for this card. Get my water out of the way before I dump it. Now the next step on here is get your ink pads out of the way. Always a good hint. And we're going to take salt. And we're going to use this salt, and we're just going to sprinkle it on this inky cardstock. Now you can see in a lot of the places the water is already dried up, but that's all right. Just where it's wet, you can see it sticking where the cardstock is still wet. The other places it will blow right off or wipe right off. But we're not going to let that happen, because the last step is to take our spritzer once again, and we're going to spritz this and wet the salt. Because now the salt and the water start to react with the ink. And that's where you get your interesting look from the background. So again, this is glossy cardstock. So I am using a fair amount of water because I'm not too worried about over wetting the glossy cardstock, because it's meant to handle it well. And that is the technique. Now the most difficult part comes. Patience, waiting for this to dry. Now you can use your heat tool. I'll tell you the easiest thing to do is just set it aside and let it dry. And for some reason, I don't know what the chemical reaction is. Maybe somebody knows. You can leave me a comment and tell me, because I would like to know. But there's probably some kind of chemical reaction going between the salt and the water that slows down the drying process. So this does dry rather slowly. So we're just going to set this aside. And I'm going to put it out of the way. And fortunately, I made another one. That this one has been drying overnight. I did not use a heat tool. I just let it dry overnight. It kind of got late last night and I did this. So it's been drying. But now we're going to take either our fingers, or you can use a paper towel, whatever you like, and you just kind of rub off the salt. And it leaves a residue on there, kind of like a salty, filmy residue that changes the color a little bit, tones it down, and it also leaves bring this closer. Can you see how it also creates some variation in the spots, and it creates this little pattern in there? Isn't that interesting? I think it's unique. It's probably not something you'd want to use every day for every card. And you can still feel the residue of salt on here. I did find that depending on the color of the ink I used, like down here in this Pretty Peacock, you can see those spots from the salt. They show up a little bit better in the Pretty Peacock. The darker the colors that you used, or more intense the ink is, I guess maybe, the more you'll see the spots from the salt. So I'm going to dump that and show you this card. I'm going to throw this away. There's salt everywhere. And throw that in the trash. And here's the card that I made using that technique. And again, so this is glossy cardstock, and I used pecan pie, pumpkin pie, and pretty peacock. And you can see on this one, I didn't get a lot of pumpkin pie. You can see a little bit up here. My pecan pie really ran a lot when I did this one. And again, that's going to always be different because it depends on how much water you have on there. But here's the card. I used Inspirational Sketches, just stamped this little bird. But it does create an interesting and pretty background, I thought, right? And on the inside, like I said, I used a little bit larger sheet of paper, so I had an edge I could trim off and put that on here. And I just stamped the bird on the envelope. And here's my note to remind me that I used glossy cardstock, but this is the wrong one. It's not the colors. It is Pretty Peacock, Pecan Pie, and Pumpkin Pie. So that is that card. I thought I would take, because this actually is quite quick, I thought I would take and do one more, and I'm going to do it with thick, basic white cardstock. And I'm going to use the Pumpkin Pie and the Pretty Peacock. And this time I'm also going to use Daffodil Delight. It's a little bit brighter color. You probably don't get quite the same effect, but on the thick, so my hint here is first to get your paper towel. Don't forget your paper towel. It does help keep your surface from getting too wet. You're going to want to be more mindful, let's call it, of how much water you get on this basic white cardstock. I use thick basic white. I would recommend using thick as opposed to the regular basic white just because it is getting wet, and this cardstock is not really meant to handle large amounts of water. The thick basic white does resist warping a little bit more than the regular one. The regular one, you get it wet, it really wants to curl up. So I would strongly recommend, if you want to use basic white, use the thick. And let me add my color, a little Daffodil Delight here in the lid. And let's get started. So I'm going to spritz this again. I'm going to spritz it a little less. It's a little hard to see how much water I actually have here. If you don't get enough, then what I recommend as you're applying this, if it's not running the way you want, then give your water painter a little extra squeeze in order to get it to run a little bit more. So we're going to start out with Daffodil Delight. And this is running pretty good. You can see it's not running like the other one. You're not getting all the feathering. And that's because this regular cardstock is definitely going to absorb your water. I still do want to get this clean in between, and it probably wouldn't hurt me to. I'm gonna squeeze a fair amount with the water now, because let me show you up here on an edge. If I don't, see how it's pretty dry. So on the pad, I'm gonna squeeze more water than I normally would into the ink pad, and get more water in here. So when I brush it, it brushes out. If you want it darker like that, that's fine. You don't want it to look like you've got streaks of, you kind of want it to be more of a wash. But I think I would like this to be a little bit darker than this. So here's my pumpkin pie refill. I'm going to add a little bit more here in my lid. And I'm just going to experiment and see what happens if I dab into the color a little bit more, and I'm going to work kind of quickly. There we go. Because like I said, the darker the color, the more you're going to see the effect of the salt. So let's, a little bit more. There we go. And I just squeezed a little harder to get that to run. So get the pumpkin pie out of here. And we are going to bring in the Pretty Peacock. Sure, I got my pumpkin pie out of my water painter. And let's bring in the Pretty Peacock. And here again, this is a dark, intense color, so I'm adding a little, squeezing and adding a little more ink to make this a little more watered down, because this is fairly dry now already. And you can see it doesn't want to spread too well. So I can just lightly spritz this to get a little bit more water. The easier thing, safer thing is to squeeze more water into your ink pad and get it wet so it will spread around a little bit more. Okay. And again, if you want some darker color, then add some more ink to your pad. And I'm just trying to pick up kind of some of the splatters here on my lid to darken it up a little bit here down on the corner. So that is that one. I did it the same way. You can, and I'll show you a card. You can certainly, you don't have to make diagonal stripes like I did. It's just easy as I'm standing here. It's a good angle for me, so it's what I do. I have a card where I didn't do it that way. Like I said, I played quite a bit. So now we're going to take our salt and we're going to sprinkle this on here. Now maybe on this regular basic white, add a little water, because it really, and again, I'm not adding a boatload of water, just a little. It helps your salt to stick to the paper a little bit better than just wanting to bounce off. If it's totally dry, it just wants to bounce off. And then once you get the amount you want on there, and vary it, it'll, depending on how much salt you put on, it's going to look different. You can see how the ink is kind of pooling up around, especially on the pumpkin pie. You can see it's, the color is intensifying. That's going to make spots. I have water left. I do. Where's it going? There we go. I think I wasn't getting much water coming out of my thing. Now, part of me wants to add more water to get it to react a little bit more, but again, this is basic white, thick cardstock, so I don't want to get it overly wet. So we're going to set this one to dry, and we're going to bring in the one I made last night. These colors are much lighter than what I just did. And we're going to wipe this up, but can you see how this paper is warped? And that's because it got wet. It doesn't like to be wet. When you use it, I'll show you a hint. When you use it in your card, what you can do to help with that. But it did, but you can see the variation of the spots from the salt, more so in the darker color here on the orange or the pumpkin pie, where I probably had more color on it when I did it. I think the one I just did, let's get this salty mess out of the way. I think this one that I just did is probably going to look even better than this one. It will lighten as it sits, but you can see the blue is a little darker, as is the pumpkin pie. The Daffodil Delight also is a little bit darker, but it will lighten because this has a salty haze on it also, remember, so that kind of changes it. I suspect this one's going to be even prettier, but I have to wait and let it dry. It's like watching paint dry. It takes forever. And like I said, I couldn't get out my heat tool. Get that out of the way. Let's get these inky wet things, they're kind of damp, out of the way. I'm going to move my little glass of water so I don't dump it on myself or my table. And let's get the card that I just made using, this is the basic white, or thick basic white. And again, it's Daffodil Delight, Pumpkin Pie, and Pretty Peacock. This is the In the Grove stamp set. What I did, because this did kind of warp a little bit, I cut my die cut with the trees here also on a thick basic white, and then I layered both of them to another layer of thick basic white on the back. So that really helped flatten it out. So if it works, that's my hint. Instead of using a basic white matte, either use a colored cardstock, which is thicker, like thick basic white, or if you want it white, or maybe you made your trees pecan pie or early espresso or something else. Just use a good thick cardstock to hold it down, and that will flatten it out for you. So that was that card. I kind of thought these looked a little bit like the Northern Lights. I don't know. Is that my imagination telling me things? But I thought it was kind of pretty how it turned out. And I was glad I tried it on the basic white. I just used a little, this is from Country Woods designer paper. I have used the same on the front and the envelope. So that's that card. That's it. So I'm going to show you this card next. This is made using the exact same colors as here: Daffodil Delight, Pumpkin Pie, Pretty Peacock. There's a little more Pretty Peacock under here and a little dab over here. But here I didn't make stripes, I just kind of let blotches. The Pumpkin Pie is darker, and can you see the speckles in here? This paper I used shimmery white, and I'm guessing you probably cannot tell. Shimmery white is also retired, but I love this paper. When I heard it was retiring, I did buy a few packs. So I have some. It is meant to also, it handles water much better. We often used it for watercoloring and coloring on it because it manages water better. But also, you probably can't see it. I can see it here very easily, but it's got a lot of shimmer and shine because that's what the basic white or the shimmery white paper is. This is also Inspirational Sketches. And here I had a little scrap that I trimmed off when I trimmed this down. And so I just use it here on the inside. And then on the envelope, I added the mushrooms again. So that's that card. Here's the one we made today. Let me bring this one here. And I have one more I'm going to show you. I said I also did it on photo color paper. And this was my very first attempt at this technique, the salted background technique. I'm like, I'm going to start with photo paper. And I used 3 different colors of blue on here: Azure Afternoon, Bubble Bath, and Balmy Blue, I think. This is a test now because I don't remember. Gorgeous Grape, Bubble Bath, and one of them in between, which I don't remember. Maybe I have it written here on my little cheat sheet. Fresh Freesia, this one in the middle. And then this one is Shaded Spruce, Granny Apple Green, and Granny Apple and Lemon Lime Twist. And I think you can probably see here, it's a little hard. But the darker colors, this is where I determined on the darker colors, you get more of the speckled effect from the salt than you do on the lighter colors. Like it's visible, but not as clear as it is on the dark where you can see them. So I just had some scraps of photo color paper, or photo paper, not photo color paper, but photo paper. And this was totally an experiment, but I thought, well, I'm going to just make a quick card by putting all 3 on there. This uses the Thoughtful Moments hybrid embossing folder. There's no stamping on this card whatsoever. It's just all either, this is made with a die, and it's just this design, and the background was embossed with a distressed tile. So those are my 4 cards. Normally I don't show you 4, but I did want to try all different kinds of paper for you. So, and want to give you an idea how they look differently, what you can maybe expect if you use different paper, and some things to watch out for. So that is where we are. Let me flip my camera back. I hope that didn't take too long. But I wanted to be able to show you how it looks on different kinds of paper and with some different color inks and things you can do. So use what you have. I was so happy it worked with basic white, thick basic white. I would definitely use thick, not the regular one. But again, depending on which paper you use, be a little bit mindful of the amount of water you spritz. If it feels like you don't have enough water because it's not spreading, the ink's not spreading very well, then just squeeze your water painter a little bit, squeeze a little water out as you're brushing, and that will help with your wash of the color. The darker colors I did find give you a little bit more visibility of the spots that the salt creates, so that's something to keep in mind. Drying time, be patient. It dries slowly. You can use your heat tool. I did, when I was practicing, I did use my heat tool. Even then, with the heat tool, and I used it on the low setting because I wasn't sure what happened if I got the salt too hot. So I used the low setting. Even then, it dries slower, especially on the photo paper and the glossy paper. It dries slower because literally the water just has to evaporate, right? It's not absorbing into the cardstock. On the basic white and the shimmery white, it did dry faster because it's absorbed the water into the cardstock. My other hint is when you're making your text sheet, you might as well make it a little bit bigger than you need. That way, if the edges turn out icky and you don't like them, you can trim them off, throw them away. If the edges turn out fine, trim them off and use them on the inside, because there's no point in having anything go to waste, right? And I would suggest using coarse salt, but experiment with regular table salt. Based on my experimentation, I think the coarse salt is giving you more visible spots from the technique, where if you've got the fine table salt, you're still going to get that salty haze on it, but I don't know if you'll get the same kind of spots. That'd be something to experiment with, and maybe I'll experiment with it in the future. I didn't this time. I thought I had enough options to kind of show what I wanted to show. So hope you like that. I hope you give it a try. The best compliment you can give me is to give me a comment and say, I'm going to try it. I got a couple of those this week. And on my Facebook page, where this video also airs, on there, and YouTube, one of you guys actually shared a card that you made with the technique we did last week. So that was fun. That was a first for me. I love it. Shout out to Lisa. Lisa, thank you for doing that. That was great. If you guys do leave or give it a try, you can always share there on my Facebook page. Leave a comment and just attach your photo. That's great. I love it. So have a great day. I hope you learned something new today. I suspect this one's a little bit new. I have not seen it out there. I didn't do a big search, but I've not seen it out there other than on Split Coast. So give it a try, have some fun, experiment. If you ruin a piece of paper, I ruined a few pieces of paper. Don't worry about it. It's just paper. We can always throw a sheet of paper away and grab another one, right? So have fun. Have a great day. Thanks for watching, and we will see you next week. God bless.